Hi, HRN listeners. We're celebrating our 15th anniversary, and we have a really fun campaign and an ask for you. This 15th anniversary tour is aiming to bring you closer to unique food and music experiences in some of the most exciting cities in America. All the while, we're raising funds to support our work empowering the next generation of food systems storytellers through our fellowship programs. Here's how it works. Donate to HRN and be entered into a raffle in the city of your choice to win a dinner for two at a noteworthy restaurant and tickets for two to a concert at a prominent local venue. We have incredible partners in New York, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Nashville, Las Vegas, Charleston, Asheville, and Ardmore, Pennsylvania, who have donated a meal for two and two tickets to a concert of the winner's choice. And all donations help fund our fellowship programs, where we're helping to build essential workforce readiness skills and food system storytelling skills. Check out heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. That's heritageradionetwork.org/15. Thank you.
This episode is brought to you by Bin to Table, a monthly food subscription service for folks who want to cook with the best pantry ingredients on the planet. Learn more at bintotable.com and use the code HRN at checkout to get $20 off your first month.
Hi there, I'm Yom, host of Item 13, an African food podcast. I'm excited to be joining the Heritage Radio Network this year as we kick off our 4th season of the podcast. On Item 13, we cover all aspects of the African food ecosystem. You will hear West Africans squabble over who has the best jollof. Newsflash, it's Ghana.
It's time to celebrate our jollof. Like, we're done with comparing who and who did what. And jollof is not just about even the rice, it's about the protein that goes with it.
Guests share their expertise on African food ingredients and spices.
This is a region where, even if you look at 18th century maps, you had something called the Pepper Coast. Fresh and aromatic peppers. That is what distinguishes West Africa.
Tips on marketing food businesses.
A good way to engage your audience is to take them on that journey. Get them talking about this idea you have. That way you're engaging them, they're engaging with each other, and you're getting useful insights that you can then pull from and use to develop your recipe.
This season, my goal is to focus on more stories outside of English-speaking West Africa. So you'll hear stories from Benin, from Uganda, Liberia, and even Haiti. You will also hear us discuss the impact of the Black Lives Matter movement and how COVID-19 has impacted some of the businesses featured on the show. You can catch up now on previous episodes of Item 13, wherever you listen to podcasts, and join us this season as we debut on HRN. Thank you.
Welcome to The Grape Nation, your weekly wine journey. Our guest is Victoria James. We'll talk to Victoria about her new book, Wine Girl, and more. I'm your host, Sam Ben-Ruby. Stay with us for The Grape Nation on the Heritage Radio Network. We bring wine to the people. Victoria James is an award-winning sommelier and the beverage director at Michelin-starred Cote Korean Steakhouse in New York City. Victoria's road to success was not an easy one, as documented in her new memoir, Wine Girl, The Obstacles, Humiliations, and Triumphs of America's Youngest Sommelier. It is an intense story of a childhood plagued by poverty, neglect, and abuse, and ultimately her uneasy ascension into the wine world as a woman. Victoria's life was shaped by guys like Antonio, Cisco, Frankie, Enzo, and Renard, and women that were countesses and cotton pickers. Buckle up for a wild ride. Welcome to the Grape Nation, Victoria.
Thank you for having me.
Actually, welcome back. You were on when you wrote your book about rosé.
Yes, Drink Pink.
Yes.
Seems like years ago now.
And I think when we're done with this interview, I could say before the interview, when you write your third book, your novel, that I will invite you back then. How's that?
Sounds great, Sam. Thank you.
All right. So due to the COVID-19 virus, we're doing a remote broadcast via Zencaster. Where are you right now, Victoria?
I'm at my apartment here in Manhattan.
Okay, so you're in New York City. I am at the beach in Fire Island.
Nice.
Victoria, I always open the show asking my guests to give us a brief background on their journey in life and wine. Your journey in life and wine is really the whole premise and discussion of this interview. It's your memoir, Wine Girl. So your story is amazing, and I want to get right into it. So the book is divided or chaptered by age increments. So let's start, with Victoria as a young girl. Let's start with your family and your upbringing as a child, because I think this had an incredible effect on you. And it's really the foundation of the book. So take it wherever you want and, bring me up to about when you're 13 and, let's discuss the diner.
Sure. Thanks, Sam. So, I do recognize that writing a memoir before the age of 30 is quite a presumptuous endeavor. And, the whole reason I decided to finally put what was originally a bunch of stories and diaries and journals together to create this book was to help other young women who have maybe not had the most ideal childhoods or have gone through a lot of abuse or neglect, and just to kind of give them hope as well that great things are possible. So around 5 years ago, I realized I had this collection of diaries from childhood and also some journal entries that I scrolled down throughout my career in restaurants. And I started to put this book together, and I realized that although it would be nice perhaps for myself to spare the emotional burden of just skipping over the childhood and going right to my restaurant career, as you mentioned, Sam, I think that my childhood did lay the foundation in many ways for my restaurant career. And one of the most common questions I get is, well, how does one become a sommelier at 21 when you're just legally allowed to drink at 21? So obviously extraordinary things happened before then that led to that. So, it was probably the most challenging thing to write about my childhood, my parents, my siblings, and what we went through. But overall, it became quite healing. My grandmother on my dad's side was a cotton picker in Tennessee, as you mentioned, and my mother's mother was a countess from Italy. And so I grew up with this sort of blue blood meets blue collar, and
Cool.
and learned that one's social class does not define one's character. But when I was quite young, I was separated from my mother when I was 7 years old by my father, and it was a very challenging time afterwards. And he suffered from alcoholism, and beforehand, my mother suffered from severe depression, and we would often go weeks at a time without a proper meal. And
Jesus.
afterwards, it was very challenging because I had no exposure prior to this to alcohol. And we grew up in a very Christian household, and we're told that alcohol was this, evil thing. And so when it suddenly, swiftly entered our household, it was a very scary thing. And my father then, in addition to drinking, got into gambling and, to try and escape a lot of the abuse that was happening at home. I wanted some sort of independence, and there was this diner in our town, the Greasy Spoon, and
This is New Jersey, right?
Yes, in New Jersey.
Famous for diners.
Famous for diners, the diner state.
Right.
Certainly more than the Garden State.
Right.
And so I just, this was such a novel concept because we never went out to restaurants. We didn't have any money. And to be able to work at a place where I had previously never gone seemed so magical. And I quickly realized that working in diners was a way to sort of hide in plain sight and also escape the difficulties of home. And I loved feeling useful and having friends, even if they were 2-3 times my age. At school, it was pretty hard to make friends. We came from this low income household, and we were bullied quite often. So, it sort of felt like the restaurants, and Anthony Bourdain talks about this, was a place for misfits, and I fit in with the misfits.
And this was, you were 13, right?
13, yes.
Right. And let's just backtrack a little. I mean, one of the important things and nice things is that you were always a good student. You somewhat took it seriously and you did well, true?
Yeah, I think it was one of the few ways in which I had control. Kids could make fun of us at school for having sneakers with holes in the bottom, but they couldn't call us stupid, myself and my siblings as well. And so we always strove to be the smartest and best in our class. It was sort of all we had.
Yeah. Now, which is sort of a backbone, to your later successes, having, the intelligence and the ability and the discipline. When you got to the diner, you were introduced to some interesting people, which I'd love you to talk about. It seems to me like it opened your eyes to hospitality, and some of these guys shaped, your thinking in life and in the business. True?
True. I think that, very quickly, when I was 13 working at this Greasy Spoon Diner, I met two of the most important people in any restaurant, and certainly this one, and that was the dishwasher and the cook, the people who have the hardest jobs in the restaurant. And Antonio and Cisco, they were quite intimidating at first to a 13-year-old girl. They seemed very they seemed very scary and loud, and so, but it was one day that I did actually connect with them, and I realized they were quite lovely people. But it sort of shaped me and made me realize that these are the people you should befriend before anyone else. They're sort of the foundation of the whole restaurant. And then later, working at another diner in New Jersey, when we moved, I met someone named Frankie who, introduced me to his love cycle, which was a way to find a way to love anyone, and not just in a superficial way, but to kind of see every guest or client, customer, as a human being. And when you do that, it changes the way you serve them. It's sort of the foundation of what hospitality really is.
So when he told you about that and he did it and he showed you how it was done, I mean, you agreed and bought into it. I mean, it seemed like a fair tactic or a way to approach people.
I mean, anyone who has ever worked in customer service knows that it's a hard job. And it's a hard job, especially in restaurants, where you're often not compensated well and the environment can be quite challenging. And so where do you find purpose in that? And where do you get the strength to keep going on day after day, guest after guest? And for me, it was the most fulfilling thing. It almost is, it is quite addicting, actually, because when you're good to someone and when you make them happy, you find you're happy in return. And that's the whole cyclical part of the love cycle. You give love to someone else and you get it in return. And someone who had rarely felt that as a child in my household, it was very fulfilling.
Is that the realization that you knew, hospitality, even at the form of the diner, was something that interested you? I mean, you didn't have much else going, but that seemed like a good thing. I mean, was that the foundation again there?
Yeah, I don't think I considered working in hospitality in the future. I never thought at that time that I would go on to become a sommelier. I didn't even know what that word meant.
Right.
I thought I was saving up money to go to college, but I loved it, and I loved restaurants. And it wasn't until later where I realized it could actually even be a career.
Yeah. I want to talk about, that very important slice, more than a slice, but where wine entered and how you approached it. But I think what separates this book, from other books and, your life and your honesty is, it's not hard to understand that at that age you were vulnerable. And like you said, you were hanging around with people twice your age. and trying to escape your family. There's a story that you chose, to put in the book about somewhat of a regular customer, where you interacted and it became, a very terrible experience. You don't have to get vivid about it, but it's truly, a shocking thing what happened, how it happened, and, kind of how you kind of moved along and put it aside. I mean, talk to me about that as much as you want.
Yeah, I think that was probably undoubtedly the hardest thing to write about. I was using Frankie's love cycle and making guests happy, and in return, I felt happy. And so, there was a downside to that, which was really hard to grapple with. And I think that certain people can take advantage of, someone's youth and vulnerabilities. And I had this one regular guest who, after work offered me a ride home, and then turned what seemed innocent turned into a very scarring night. And I was actually raped by him. And I think that, unfortunately, I had no choice but to put it aside and move on. And most women understand to some degree what that feels like. You normalize it because there's nothing else to do. I mean, 1 in 4 women in North America are raped in their lifetime. It's unfortunately increasingly common. And the only way to combat this is to talk about it more and to use our voices to help other women understand that they're not alone and that something needs to be done about these predators.
And you were how old then? I mean, that's part of the shocking part.
I was 15.
Yeah. Now, you have 2 sisters and a brother?
I have 3 sisters and a brother.
3 sisters and a brother. I knew I missed something. And after that happened, I mean, I really encourage people to buy and read the book. And, this part is, you're fairly vivid about it. When you walked out of the car and went home, I mean, you didn't talk to anybody, even your oldest sister, right? I mean, it's just something you internalized.
It's something I internalized because I felt like I had no one to turn to. My mom, we didn't live with her anymore. My father was suffering with
Not the guy.
drinking. I come in after being raped, and he's passed out on the couch drunk.
Right.
So it's not there's not really a lot to turn to. And my older sister is not included in the book for many reasons. So she obviously was not someone I could go to.
Right.
And then I just had my younger siblings who I was close to, but I felt like
Too
I had
young.
to protect them, and they're too young. So who would I turn to? And there was really no one I could trust with this.
Right. It's a hard thing to carry. I want to move on this, but I want to ask you one more thing, and I hate to ask this question as a guy. But you answered it to some extent, and some extent is obvious, but it's really the second question on this that I want to get to. Why and how do you put yourself, in vulnerable positions like this? And from experiences, what advice can you give to women or young girls?
Yeah, I think that during those times, I felt so alone and like there was no one to turn to. And really, in retrospect, it's hard to put the burden on the young women, but if you can, go to the police station, report it. It's really important to do so. I wish I had at the time. I wish I had that strength and
Right.
foresight, but I didn't, and I was scared. But I think that it's not just advice to young women. I think it's advice to the whole community. And if you have a sister, a daughter, a mother, a friend that's a woman that you care about, do let them know that if anything like this ever happened, that they could come to you for help and support. A lot of women feel alone.
Right.
Most
So
women feel alone.
don't internalize and act. It literally, like you said, go to the police or go to somebody, that you feel you can talk to, but do it, right?
Yeah, and to those that surround these women, make them feel as if they can come to you.
Yes. Yes. This wasn't a question, but I thought of it. I mean, you had this kind of warm feeling about your grandparents. Those were people you couldn't go to?
Unfortunately, at the time they had already passed away.
Oh, okay. That's my bad for not the time.
It's
But
okay.
would you have? I mean, but based on the type of people they were did they fit, the description of somebody you could comfortably go to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to say, but that would have been ideal. I think that, I also had aunts that were wonderful, and, in retrospect, I should have told them as well.
Right.
But it's hard. I think that also in the household I grew up with, we were told to, especially the women, that we had to kind of internalize our pains and our struggles. And I watched my mother suffer from
Right.
depression and mental illness, and my father, let her know that that's unacceptable. To be a good Christian woman was to be silent. So,
Right.
it's hard.
Nothing was going your way as far as the best way to handle that, unfortunately. And unfortunately, and we'll talk about it a little, it's not the thrust of this interview, but problems like this persisted throughout your career. Let's talk about, and your childhood is, way more complex and interesting and, crazy than the time we spent on it. You really get into your relationships, with your siblings and the effect your dad had, particularly on your brother and all that. But we covered that pretty well. Walk me through your hospitality career. But before we get to that, and on your hospitality career, you were young and there was somewhat of a quick ascension at some good places. But the question I have for you is, when was that first exposure to wine, and when did you realize, what, I want to spend a little more time, pursuing this, reading it, I'm intrigued. When was that? And that answer may fall into the hospitality timeline.
Yeah, I was bartending during college, studying psychology at Fordham University and working at a small little Italian place on Restaurant Row called Latanzi. And
Next to Becco.
Next to Becco, yes,
Right.
indeed. So I, really just thought kind of bartending was like being a server at first. I thought, you had an order and you fulfilled it. But there was something about wine that seemed, I was too young, too poor, and definitely the wrong gender for everyone at the restaurant, were older men, and they had this, or at the time I thought they were filled with knowledge about this subject that I didn't understand. So, almost by happenstance, I found this dusty copy of Wine for Dummies behind the register when I was cleaning the bar. And I thought, well, this is something I definitely could use. And I was so studious and loved absorbing information like a sponge. So I started reading Wine for Dummies, and in a weekend was done and wanted more. And so I picked up the Wine Bible and by Karen McNeil. And then all of a sudden I realized that this wasn't just beverage. This wasn't just, the alcohol my father had gotten drunk on. Wine was it was complicated, and it seemed to combine so many of my interests of history and travel and studying, and of course hospitality. So it sort of just clicked, and I don't know if at the time I still knew it could be a career, but I wanted to learn more. So I researched more about wine and came across the word sommelier. First I Googled how to even pronounce that.
Right.
And what that was, but I learned it was a job, which was incredible, but I was only 19 at the time. So, I snuck into a few wine tastings and classes, and then became transfixed. And so I deferred for a semester at school and then deferred for another semester. And soon I found that I never went back.
But so a couple things. You were at Latanzi, you were a bartender, your gateway book was Wine for Dummies, right?
Yes.
How old were you and what year was that?
I was 19, so it was 2009.
Okay. So you became very self-motivated and passionate about wine, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So tell me, let's just take a minute to talk about, so here's a person that's interested in wine, didn't know what a sommelier meant, knew nothing, and enters into the wine world, which we'll get into, has its own problems. But, what were some of your experiences, when you got into wine education and the world of wine?
So I wanted to learn more, and I spent the next couple of years doing that before I could legally become a sommelier at 21. And so I searched for wine classes in New York and came upon this organization, in which I did take classes. And then after that, I also wanted more experience. So during this time, while I was studying and taking these classes, I became a cellar rat or a cellar hand down at Harry's at Hanover Square, which has an incredible wine collection. And my job was to sort of inventory it and organize it while I was also bartending there. So, I was really kind of burning the candles at both ends. But
So, Victoria, it's fair to say the wine collection at Harry's is like a guy coming out of minor league baseball and starting for the Yankees, right? I mean, the vastness of that collection is, unique in New York.
quite, I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah,
Still to
I
this
mean,
day.
let's put that in context. All right, so you're a cellar at Harry's. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, not at all. So cellar rat at Harry's, the many people have said the collection is priceless, but if you did have to put a price on it, it was probably around 8 million. To give you context, my restaurant now, which is Michelin starred restaurant, has over 1,200 selections on the wine list. It's probably only worth $250,000. So
We'll discuss why, but go ahead.
so, that is a huge, huge cellar we're talking about, and it was worth 4 floors. And so it was a very daunting task, but I loved being in the cellar. I loved learning about these bottles, holding them, seeing these beautiful labels. But I quickly learned that the wine world was also very toxic and had its problems. There was an instructor at the school where I was studying that was just misogynistic and terrible, and there's a lot of corruption there, which only continued throughout my sommelier career and within education. And also, my one of my bosses at Harry's was incredibly abusive, and there was multiple cases of sexual harassment. So it was almost as if everywhere I turned, I couldn't escape the abuse, even though I really loved this world and wanted to be a part of wine.
And there was no structure anywhere to, take it up with HR or management. That was the culture, right?
The culture was terrible. There was no HR. I didn't know who I could report it to. I mean, once, I did mention something to three of the investors actually who are part owners, and they all kind of just laughed and said, "Well, good for that guy." I mean, this was
Good.
this was the definition of an old boys club. This was in Wall Street, and
Yeah.
so women were seen as commodities. And I was encouraged as a bartender to dress, be scantily clad and entertain these guys, and they would turn the air conditioning down to 55 degrees in the room so that all the men in suits were comfortable, but the women wearing almost nothing behind the bar were shivering. And it was just an environment that was not conducive to women.
Yeah. All right. So, take me through the career a little. So you get early exposure at a young age at Harry's, which has a crazy wine list. Thus begins sort of the culture, which is toxic, and, the abusiveness, of the male, wine world. So how long do you stay at Harry's, and where do you go after?
So I stayed at Harry's until I was 21, and I worked a harvest in California, which was also very enlightening, learning about how wine is really made. And that kind of really, really sparked my passion to become a sommelier and to become more involved in this wine world. But I didn't really know where to turn or how to even do that. And the culture at Harry's was becoming more and more unbearable, and I had to get out. So I applied to a bunch of different places in New York, and miraculously, it seemed, I got a position at what was then, at the time, before it closed, a Michelin-starred restaurant called Oriole, which was between Bryant Park and Times Square, run by Chef Charlie Palmer.
Right. And that, you go from this huge wine list and Wall Street institution to now even finer dining, Michelin-starred. So you would think, well, life should get better, right? The environment shouldn't be too bad.
Well, that's what I kept thinking. I thought, when I walked into this place, talk about intimidating, the pressed tablecloths and the tiny little spoons and the shiny glassware. I thought it was like heaven. But and I had no idea that something called steps of service even existed, or mise en place. And but I thought that the better the place, the better the environment, and it actually seemed quite the opposite. And the further I climbed in my career, it seemed the worse it became. And it was a good there's good and bads to each situation, and I learned quickly quite a bit about fine dining in this whole world. And I then also at 21 passed my certified sommelier exam. But it was just such a challenging place to work, long work weeks that again was filled with just a really toxic environment.
I mean, really toxic, abusive bosses, that continued to act, to things that were common to you in the past. True?
Yeah, I mean, I think that happened later as well in my career. And again, you sort of normalize this in general. And it wasn't just the people who were supposed to protect me, it was the guests as well. And I think one problem nowadays with dining is this slogan, the customer is always right, still reigns supreme. I think the customer is often not right. And, when you even put them on that pedestal, it can become dangerous. The customer is a customer, and they should be treated with love and respect. And in turn, the customer should also treat those who serve them with love and respect. But unfortunately, that doesn't exist.
That's Frankie talking.
That's Frankie talking.
But so let's, we don't have to get too deep into it. But, I think people understand, and they'll understand more in the book, the toxicity of this, industry and your experiences. Tell me how it translates or it crosses over to the customer. I mean, tell me some of the things. I mean, I think being a woman was, made you a bigger target. But I think just there were a lot of assholes out there, right?
A lot of assholes, for sure. And I think that, when a young woman, especially, who is...
You could say it, attractive.
Certainly attractive as well. And I think that, beauty can be power, but it can also be a detriment as well, especially when there's no one in charge of protecting women. And I see this still in restaurants all the time. We hire attractive women to be these faces, hostesses, coat check women,
right,
bartenders, sommeliers, but we don't protect them. And what are restaurants doing to protect these women who are especially vulnerable? So, a lot of these men, I mean, it would be maybe as simple as using really, really horrible language and trying to solicit sex from me and slapping my ass, all the way to, there's this horrible thing that happens to me later when I was working in a different restaurant, Maria, where the guests actually roofied me and put, these drugs in wine that they made me taste, so people have to understand the customer is not always right. Oftentimes they can be quite wrong.
Yeah, I mean, right in those few sentences you explained, a few things: physical, emotional, and, being drugged about as bad as you can get. The other thing that I also realize is that there were women in the industry, and you'd think you'd find solace in other women, but they were equally as bad as men at times, right?
Yeah, I think that, there are good and bad in both men and women. And unfortunately, in the wine world, it's so male dominated, this old boys club. And so there are few positions available, it seems, for women. There are very few women who run Michelin-starred restaurants, who run wine programs. And so I think it's almost drilled into some of our heads that we have to be competitive with one another in order to get these roles, which means that there can be a lot of backstabbing and cruelty.
Yeah. So a few more things. Get me out of Oriole, and let's, discuss Maria for a minute or two. But at some point, and when is this? Is it Oriole? Is it Maria that you've endured enough, BS from your bosses, that you determined you would never let, another boss or man touch you again. So weave me out of Oriole into Maria, and how you realize this has got to end.
Yeah, I think finally got that courage later in my career, but I was really done with Oriole, and my boss, who was the wine director at Oriole, who's actually a lovely human being, was leaving, and he was sort of the only one I trusted there, to protect me, and he was leaving, so I was like, I'm definitely getting the hell out of here. So I applied to the Alta Marea group, first starting by opening the Ristorante Marini on the Upper East Side, which has since closed and was full of a whole host of problems, and then to their flagship Marea on Central Park South. So with this group, I certainly, ascended to now 2 Michelin stars, and at the time Marea had 2 Michelin stars. Now they only have 1, but I was on this different level where if someone ordered a $250 bottle of wine, they were penny pinchers or cheapskates. It was very different from anywhere I had worked before. And, we were bringing in millions and millions of dollars every year in wine sales. And so you're also dealing now with the 1%. And with that comes its own slew of interesting stories, which you can find in the book.
Right.
But it wasn't until later when I actually was let go from Marea for, a variety of reasons, which I talk about in the book, that I finally stop and think, what do I want from life? I'd been going so fast. I was, only 25 at the time, and I had already worked at all these Michelin-starred restaurants. I was already a sommelier. It seems I had achieved so much, but I was burnt out and depressed. And so it took me a while to kind of step back and go see a therapist and realize what it was that I wanted from life. And that's when I met Simon Kim from Piora, and that's when everything changed. And that's when I started finally working in a healthy place.
All right, so Victoria, we have to take a quick break. I'm talking to Victoria James. Victoria is the author of her newish book, Wine Girl, and she's the beverage director at Cote Korean Steakhouse in New York. You're listening to The Grape Nation on Heritage Radio Network. We'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by Bin to Table, a monthly food subscription service for folks who want to cook with the best pantry ingredients on the planet, founded by Ben Simon. After working for President Obama, Ben spent 5 years traveling the world for Greenpeace, campaigning on climate change and sustainable agriculture. He always kept his eye out for delicious food to bring back home. Now, with everyone's travels on hold and home cooking more important than ever, Bin subscriptions provide a way for home cooks to experience different food cultures each month and put together nourishing, delicious meals with the best pantry items on the planet. With Taste the World, get a new shipment of different best-in-class ingredients to explore a new cuisine each month, along with tips and tricks to help out. We're talking delicious single-origin spices, cold-pressed olive oil, beautiful sauces, and lots of ways to use them. There's also an essential subscription which gets you a delicious assortment of heirloom, hard-to-find recipe staples. You can also get both each month with the full Bin to Table box subscription. Learn more at bintotable.com and use the code HRN at checkout to get $20 off your first month, and Bin to Table will donate $10 to HRN.
All right, we're back. We're back with my guest, Victoria James. We're talking about her new book, Wine Girl, and we're at the point where she's ascended in the hospitality industry at high-end restaurants. And I think, Victoria, we're at a point where you've gained some good experience. You realize the toxicity in the industry, and it was important. You took some time off, and it was important for you to find the right people and the environment. And that was Simon Kim, who was at Piora, Piora. What, impact did Simon have on your life? What was the environment you were walking into? How did that change things?
So after Maria, I went on so many different interviews, and it felt very degrading. Every place I went seemed just more toxic than the last, and
Same crap?
same crap,
Yeah.
different name.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
And, it's so prevalent in fine dining, and it felt like every place was just, I didn't want to work for any of these places. And I thought maybe did I fall out of love with restaurants? I didn't want it to be true. And then I finally met Simon, and everything was different. Just walking into the restaurant Piora, it was this little jewel box of a restaurant in the West Village.
But go back. How did you get to Simon?
So I got to Simon because one of the managers that I had worked with at Maria, who's lovely, we were all let go in this large sweep. And he also landed at Piora. And he called me and said that he needs a wine director, and he couldn't think of anyone better than me. And so I already, felt comfortable that there was this person I trusted at this restaurant. And he was saying that it was nothing like the other places we've worked. Trust me, it's a good place. And when I walked in, I knew that was true. Simon didn't look at my resume, and, he wasn't obsessed with the things that didn't matter. He cared about hospitality. He cared about making people happy. I mean, he really had a restaurant because he liked being in a restaurant, and he's an owner that worked the floor every night. I mean, that's unheard of. Every place I had worked before, I'd met the owner maybe once or twice, or seen them a few times in my tenure. They were off somewhere counting their money and not there listening and being with their staff and team. And so I knew right away that this was somewhere I wanted to be, and I still work for Simon today.
Right. So that was Piora. Is it fair to say it's the first time that when you went looking for a job, besides them sizing you up, you were sort of sizing them up? Like, is this right for me? Is this where I want to be? Are they showing me what I want to do? And Simon did that for you?
Yeah, I think, beforehand, I was incredibly insecure, and I thought that I didn't deserve anything but maybe abuse in a toxic environment, and I normalized it. But being able to step back and take the time to slowly think about what I wanted and what I deserved, what everyone deserves, was healthy. And that's the first time I did that at Piora, and I'm so glad I did, and I didn't just rush into another toxic environment.
So I cut you off when you said you walked in and it was a jewel box of a restaurant. Simon impressed you. The environment was right. But also the people that were there. There's some good stories, about the people you met at Piora and how they're still around you now. Talk to me a little about that, how Piora ended, and then get me into Cote.
Yeah, so, Pure was such a small, beautiful team, and one person there that probably made the biggest impression, besides Simon, of course, was someone who started as a food runner named Wesley, also from Korean heritage, and he just loved restaurants. And I recognized in him something I also saw in myself, and sort of this bright-eyed, bushy-tailness that you first get when you enter an industry you love, and you just want to soak up everything like a sponge. And so, Wesley and I started doing wine classes together, and he was just, he's the sweetest, and he would set up before class and bring his little notebook, and each week come with great questions. And he made his way up quite quickly, actually, from food runner to bar back to server. And then right when Pure was about to close, there were a lot of issues financially with the place that I go in, further detail there. And sometimes that has to happen. You have to fail, I think, in order to later succeed. And Simon's dream was to always open up this Korean steakhouse restaurant, something that combined the Fat Cat New York steakhouses with his heritage of Korean barbecue. And so, he chose myself to run the beverage program, and then he chose Wesley to be kind of the manager and the front of house guy. And
that's amazing.
It was amazing.
Wesley was like a little Victoria, right?
Or a little Simon too. I think
a hybrid, which is a good hybrid.
Well, I think one of the most rewarding things in restaurants is when you finally have a position of power, and it can be even being a server or being a chef or being a sommelier, being able to give back. And I was in a position at Pure as the wine director, and I was able to give back to Wesley. And Simon was able to give back and make him and myself both partners in Cote Korean Steakhouse and part owners. And it was just incredible. The first time I think I saw Wesley in a suit, I think I cried.
That's nice. Yeah. If you go to the Cote page, there's a whole listing of everyone who works there with descriptions. You were there, Simon, Wesley. It's nice to see that. Let's talk about Cote for a second. You and I were talking off air, and New York is about to reopen restaurants on a limited basis. So tell me a few things. How has Cote operated during the last 5-6 months during the pandemic? And now what happened? What are you doing, and what happens when things open up?
Yeah, the last 7 months have been some of the hardest ever.
Torture.
I think that, we were one of the few restaurants that stayed open the entire time, from delivery and takeout to now, starting tomorrow, we're opening indoor dining at 25%. And, the reason we did that, or the reason we all decided upon that, was that we didn't want to lose each other. And Simon could have furloughed the entire team. And maybe if it was a bigger restaurant group, that would have made sense. I think, every restaurant group has to decide what's best for them.
Almost forced to.
But, he decided instead to keep all of his management team on, which, as you can imagine, it's incredibly expensive when your revenue drops from $12 million a year to nothing. So, he even set up a fund for the staff, and out of his own pocket paid them a small stipend each week. And this is the hourly team members, everyone from the dishwashers to the servers, for as long as he could. That's rare. And, in order to keep that alive, we had to bring in some sort of revenue. So we quickly pivoted. I think that one of the great things about our team is that it's full of creative and smart individuals. And Simon has built us up to have so much confidence. And we just really pivoted quickly, and we made it doable, even though it was incredibly challenging, and it was not without its dark times. And I think we all had a few, breakdowns during it. But we always had each other, at least. And that's something I think that is very special. And I know that one of Simon's fears, one of my fears, was that if we had closed, like we had maybe closed Pure together, which is a very sad thing, maybe we wouldn't have reopened, or maybe we would have, but we would have lost the team, the core members. And honestly, what makes Cote so special is not the food, and it's not the wine, although those things are both great. It's the people. And you can't replicate that.
Yeah.
And if we couldn't bring those people back, I don't know what Cote would be today.
It seems like, Simon did all the right things, and, in the long run, it'll, pay off, hopefully when things resume normalcy. You mentioned earlier that, it's about a 1,200 bottle wine list. Is that selections or total bottles?
Selections.
Okay, so that's pretty big deal, but we're not talking about fancy Burgundies and Bordeaux's, which makes it, Harry's value to this value. But tell me a little about the list. I know you focus on, smaller producers' stories, which influenced you, and you have this thing with magnums. Talk to me about both of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're so lucky that we have a platform at Cote, this Michelin-starred restaurant that's been James Beard nominated for our wine list now 2 years in a row. And, when you have this, when you're on this platform, we really wanted to do something with it. So, our wine list focuses on farmers, producers who are committed to biodynamic, sustainable practices. And also we try to lift up marginalized groups like women and Black, Indigenous persons of color when possible. But, more important than all of that is that we feel that wine should be delicious, and it should speak to a sense of place, whether you're looking to spend $50 or $5,000, we can help you find something that's great.
And why magnums? I know why, but tell everybody.
Yeah, so, part of the convivial atmosphere of Cote and the large party size of Korean barbecue and steakhouse is that you have large groups of people, and sure, of course, magnums are inherently impressive, but they also keep the wine younger and fresher for longer, since there's less overall exposure to the effects of oxygen through the cork. And so if you taste the same wine in a 750 milliliter bottle next to a magnum, the magnum actually tastes better. And it's easy to do in theory, just stock up your wine list with lots of magnums, but in reality, it's actually very hard to do. I have to go directly to these producers and get these
Right.
bottlings just for us, because we pour everything by the glass out of magnums in large formats. So when you come into Cote, you know that not only are you drinking the best possible wine by the glass, but also it's bottled specifically for us. And so you're really getting a sense of place, and you're getting the highest quality, which I think oftentimes wines by the glass are often an afterthought or a way for big companies to kind of cash in. So, we really wanted to take that seriously and give someone, even if they're ordering a $12 glass of wine, the best possible experience. And of course, also they can order that $5,000 Magnum too if they want.
Right.
It's sort of that great highbrow, lowbrow.
All right, so you convinced me and you made me very thirsty. We talked about how Cote is opening up. If I, as a consumer, want to get into Cote, what do I do? Do I go to a resi or open table? Do I call directly? People, as New York restaurants are opening, people are going to morph back into getting out. What's the best way for them to do it for Cote?
Yeah, at Cote, you can go on our website to make reservations. If you don't see the time slot or party size you want there, you can always give us a call. We have reservationists on staff to take your call and see what we can do. The best thing you can do is come in with, at least 3 or 4 people, so you can taste everything, drink as much as
Yes.
possible.
Right.
And I think supporting restaurants right now is so
It's
important. Not
The
just
food
Cote, all
options
of
are
them.
as interesting as the wine options. That's what makes that place amazing. All right, listen, we can't finish discussing the book without an important person and time in your life. And, with all the effed up, stuff you had with men and growing up, you met a wonderful guy named Lyle. And just give me a little quick story there, when you met him. And you guys are recently got married in an interesting place. Let's talk about that a little.
Yeah, so this isn't a French novel. I thought it had to have a happy ending. And I'm very fortunate that I did meet Lyle. He's one of the first men that treated me with respect and love, and also shared the same interest in wine I do. He works for Kermit Lynch, wine merchant.
The best.
Pretty great, selling wine. And he also makes wine with his brother in California. And one of the things that first struck me about Lyle when we had our first date together, I thought he was going to pull out this super fancy bottle. I mean, he works for arguably one of the best importers that imports, bottles everything from Allemande to Clap to Cocherie and Ravenel. And so I thought he was going to pull out this really expensive fancy bottle to try and impress me. But he didn't. Instead, he pulled out Domaine de la Tourvière Collioure Rouge, which is, maybe $20, $25 retail. It's this red wine from the south of France where the Pyrenees Mountains fall into the Mediterranean Sea. It's French Catalonia. And it's a wine that's not expensive, but speaks to a sense of place and is beautiful. And I realized that we were both shared this same view of how wine can bring people together, how it can be restorative and amazing. And so we fell in love and we dated for a few years, and then he proposed during our last book tour together. We had the Rosé book together, and then we got married a year later in Piedmont in the Northwest in Italy, where my mother's family is from. And
The Countess's family?
the Countess's family.
And it describe the place a little. Frescoes, it's crazy.
Yeah,
And
it's a
there are
beautiful
some
place.
Is there a picture in the book? I forgot.
There is the last
At the
page.
end, yeah. I mean, that's worth looking at. And Lyle is also an illustrator and did illustrations for the Rosé book, right?
Yes, he did all the illustrations for Drink Pink, which is also published by HarperCollins. And it's so interesting when you work with someone, a significant other, on a project together. It can either make or break you. I'm very type A and like things done right away.
Yeah.
And
So it worked out.
he's an artist, so he waited until the last minute to do all the drawings, and it actually it drove me crazy for a bit, but then it brought us closer together.
Yeah, I remember reading that in the book because you are such a perfectionist. It did drive you crazy. All right, listen, couple things. We got about 10 minutes left. I want to jump into our wine list because, I'm as much curious about, what you're drinking as anyone. So I want to do that. And then when we're done with that, I want to just talk a little about, wine empowered, and then we'll wrap everything up. So let's jump right into the wine list. I ask my guests the same 5 questions. We've asked over 200 people these questions. I post them on social media. Our listeners are very interested, in getting intel from guys like you. So the first question is, what are you drinking now? What are you tasting for yourself, the restaurant? What's in the fridge? What's seasonal doing to you? What are you sipping?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with the change of seasons now, I'm drinking a lot of chilled reds, kind of the in-between summer, fall season. And
Get specific. Tell me a couple of the chilled reds that you're drinking. Could be region or even, the maker.
yeah, I think right now, one of my favorite wines that kind of goes with everything and so savory is Tuscan Red, Sangiovese, of course. We love producers like Sesti, Villa di Gaggiano, Mocali, Poggio de Soto, Isole Elena. Some of these wines are expensive and some of them are dirt cheap, and that's kind of
Right.
the beauty of it. It's also incredibly delicious with steak, so we have quite a few at the restaurant.
All right. So the next question was favorite wine and food pairing.
I mean, since my
Not
family,
something you eat every night, but something that, you sort of alluded to it with Sangiovese and steak, but that could be one answer. What else?
so I mean, since my family is from a little bit further north in Piedmont in Italy, I think one of my favorite food pairings that's almost transformative is Nebbiolo with vitello tonato, which is this weird dish that in
I know.
theory,
Describe it quickly.
yeah, it's cold veal that's like pressed super thin, and it's topped with a tuna mayonnaise sauce, and you're thinking like tuna mayonnaise on cold veal sounds
I
weird
know.
and disgusting. But then when you have it, it's for some reason like savory and mineral and delicious. And then when you have it with a nice chilled glass of this very savory, earthy Nebbiolo, and for me, that's the definition of what grows together, and a sense of place. Those two
Yeah.
things are just incredibly historic and traditional, and they can only work together, and that's why they're so beautiful.
Classic Northern Italian. Now, like Sangiovese, Nebbiolo is the grape, and you can make Barolo, Barbaresco, Asti, Alba. What are we talking about, with Nebbiolo? Any of those, or?
Yeah, any of those for sure. I mean, I think that with simple country food like vitello tonato, the more humble the better. And you can have a Longue Nebbiolo from Giuseppe Vira. You can have even a fancy, Barolo or Barbaresco from Bruno Giacosa. But I think again, the beauty of this region is that there are both.
That's a good one. I know you work a lot of hours, but do you have a favorite wine restaurant and or bar, or a few? I would think probably in New York, where they do what you do, which is have a great wine selection, an interesting wine selection, people that are knowledgeable and enthusiastic, just a great environment. I mean, do you see other places that carry that torch?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, two of my favorites. The first for sure is King, which is, ironically run by 3 women.
Yes.
And they have a great wine list and program run by Annie Shi. And again, it's this place that they have wine and food that, goes together, that really carries a sense of place. It's Southern Italian, or rather, it's more sort of coastal Italian and Southern French in style, and it's just really lovely. And I think that all the wines that Annie chooses, they really have a lot of dignity and they stand for something. It's really lovely. And also
Very
across
popular.
very popular. And then just across the street is Ariel Ars's Niche and Special Club, which I think she does a great job there, bringing in other people and using her platform to really highlight, Black, Indigenous, persons of color, and other marginalized groups. And although she is super brilliant, she, uses her platform to really highlight others. And I think that's a wonderful thing.
I agree with you on both. Ariel has been on the show. She was also gracious enough to invite me to do one of the wine nights there, which I'm sure you did too.
Yeah.
Way back when things were normal. All right, fourth question. Favorite all-time wine? I initially, and I tell this every week, I initially put this question on to get the Victorias to tell me what was the rarest, most expensive wine, that you ever drank. I don't care about that. And you may have answered the question, so I'm going to need a second one. What's the wine that was the most important to you, that, had an effect on you, that still resonates, that's memorable? I can answer two things from the book and you. Certainly the wine Lyle, poured for you, and, you had an awakening with Amarone. So if I answered the question, expand. If there's others, go.
Yeah, the wine I had with Lyle was certainly special and will always hold a place in my heart. I think one of the go-to wines I just always have a fondness for, and if there's one wine I could maybe drink forever, it's Domaine Tempier Bandol Rosé. Of course, because I wrote the book on rosé and I spent a lot of time studying different styles, but for me, this wine there's so much more to it than just the wine. And, it's
the owner.
The owner, Lulu Peyrotte, is 102 now, beyond a centurion.
Legendary.
And, there are people who have gone to her, these sort of pilgrimages. If you're in the wine and food world, you have to go and see her and study with her, especially her cooking. Alex Waters from Chez Panisse and Richard Olney and, of course, Kermit Lynch all went here to kind of, learn what it was all about. And to me, she embodies that Provençal lifestyle, but also, this joie de vivre of like, wine is supposed to be fun and it brings people together and it's restorative. And, having a glass of her rosé, which is delicious and made in this biodynamic method next, with her bouillabaisse that's distinctly, Marseille influenced, this small little Mediterranean fishing village.
Good.
It's incredible.
Sounds good. And we're not going to get into it, but, rosé certainly goes beyond sitting at the pool in the summer. And this is a perfect example of that kind of rosé, right?
Definitely. You can certainly have it by the pool, but you can also have it in the dead of winter too.
Like you said, with a hearty bouillabaisse. Mm-hmm. All right, Victoria, last question, and I think you could handle this one. I want you to recommend the best wine around $15-20. I want you to recommend a red or a white. You can give me specific makers, regions like Muscadet. I always say my kids are in their 20s. They can't bring a crappy supermarket wine as a gift or to a dinner or party, but they can't afford $40. So how are they wowing everybody at 15, 20, 22? Give me a white and a red.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there is so much value in German Rieslings, and I know every sommelier in the world will say that, but it really is true. And there's a lot of quality there. It doesn't necessarily have to be sweet. For example, Carl Lowen's a great producer. Reinhold
Spell Lowen for me.
Loewen.
Carl Lowen. Okay. You got another maker you like?
Of course. I mean, you can go with classics like Keller, for example,
right,
which is in
who
the Rheinhessen.
Makes some good value oriented. All right, so for the white, I agree 100%. Riesling, and I do agree it's a Somm favorite. Give me a red.
Yeah, another place that offers crazy value is Spanish reds for sure. Everyone knows the big regions, of course, Rioja, Priorat, but especially in the Northwest in like Bierzo, there's really a lot of great value, Galicia, Ribera Sacra, etc. So, one of my favorites within there is, Raul Perez makes a lot of great Mencia influenced Bierzo wines.
Does he make really Altrea? Great. Is that him?
He makes the Altrea, yeah.
Yeah, that's a little more, but that's
a little more, but that's great.
All right, so those are great answers. We got to wrap up quickly, but I don't want to leave without you telling me about Wine Empowered, an organization you founded with a couple of other women that you happen to work with. In light of, the world, the pandemic, all the protests, everything you've been through, you started this organization, Wine Empowered. What is it to do what?
Yeah, so we founded Wine Empowered in 2018. We started our inaugural class this year. Wine Empowered, we aim to diversify the wine industry by offering tuition-free wine classes to women and persons of color in hospitality. And so myself and Amy Zhou and Cynthia Chang, two other female sommeliers, them from Chinese heritage, really didn't see ourselves reflected in the wine world. And so, we realized the biggest barrier was education. So we started this 501c3 nonprofit called Wine Empowered. And unfortunately, the middle of our first class was cut short due to the pandemic, but we hope to restart shortly. And this inaugural group of 22 students, they had to go through an application process, referral process, interview process. And we really got these whip smart, curious people that I believe will change the hospitality industry. And the more voices we have from different backgrounds in our world, the better and the more inclusive it can be.
So on a go-forward basis, hopefully things will continue and you'll continue to do classes. If people want more info, where should they go?
You can go to wine-empowered.com or follow us on Instagram at Wine Empowered.
Okay. All right, Victoria, we got to wrap up. Just answer this question, and I'm going to do a quick show wrap-up. Do you think writing the book was more of a reclamation for you or an FU to others? Or both?
I think that it was definitely more of a reclamation, but more than that, I think it was a call to action. I hope other women.
Okay.
I hope other women will read my book and realize there's value in telling their truth and their stories, and that together we can fight for more social justice.
I agree, and I agree that the book isn't just Wine Girl, but it's Girl. It's about being a woman and all of that, and I think that, that is very important. I highly recommend it. I don't think it's just for women. I think guys should read it. I'm going to make my wife read it because I think she'll enjoy it. So we'll get to that in a second. Here's our wrap-up. If you have a question, suggestion, wine happening, or event, hit me up at samatthegrapenation.com. That's samatthegrapenation.com. Subscribe to the Grape Nation podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your pods. Follow us on Facebook at The Grape Nation, on Instagram at SBenRuby, and on Twitter at BenRuby. A little confusing, but use the hashtag The Grape Nation on both. As I mentioned, we'll post Victoria's wine list on our social media sites. Victoria, where can we get the book? Wherever they sell books?
Wherever books are sold.
I know this got cut short, but you got great notices in between. Any appearances in person or virtual?
I will be this upcoming Sunday at 9 p.m. at the Brooklyn Book Fest. With Dr. Jessica B. Harris and Priya Krishna and James Birdswell.
Heck of a lineup.
Yeah, please tune in.
All right. And I just wanted to say National Orange Wine Day has now expanded to Virtual Orange Wine Week, October 5th through October 10th. If you're interested in or love orange wine, go to www.nationalorangewineday.org for more info. Thank you to our guest, Victoria James. Good luck with the book. Thank you to our engineer, Amanda, and everyone at the Heritage Radio Network. I'm Sam Ben-Ruby, and you've been listening to The Grape Nation. The Grape Nation is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. For our freshest content, subscribe to our newsletter. Enter your email at the bottom of our website, heritageradionetwork.org. Connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at heritage_radio. You can also find us at facebook.com/Heritage Radio Network. Heritage Radio Network is a nonprofit organization driving conversations to make the world a better, fairer, more delicious place. And we couldn't do it without support from listeners like you. Want to be part of the food world's most innovative community? Subscribe to the shows you like, tell your friends, and please join the HRN family by becoming a member. Just click on the beating heart at the top right of our homepage. And thanks for listening.